people, how you doing? So, it is time to compare the photography of the OnePlus 9 Pro and the iPhone 13 Pro. Now, do keep in mind, although both of these are pros, actually the iPhone 13 Pro costs a lot more in India compared to the OnePlus, yeah. But anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. Instead, I do want to mention that the photography that the OnePlus 9 Pro offers, it's quite a bit different compared to the iPhone 13 Pro here. It's almost as good, but in different areas compared to the iPhone. That's the best way that I can really think of to put it. And you'll see that soon enough. So without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, so we are kicking things off with an image that has a lot of differences between these two phones. I mean, it's quite obvious. There are two major differences. Firstly in the colors, and then secondly in the HDR processing. Now you might be asking, what's the real problem with the colors? Well, look at the building in the background. It's got a bit too much saturation on the OnePlus 9 Pro, but it looks completely fine on the iPhone. But the iPhone's HDR processing is clearly not doing its job right, at least, because it's just completely crushing all the shadows. Maybe it's an effort to, really preserve contrast, but the OnePlus 9 Pro is exposing those shadows correctly. We have so much more color depth in there, and yet we have really good contrast on the OnePlus as well. So I'm not really sure why it's crushing the shadows so much, but I can tell you that I do prefer the OnePlus here. Another place where I do think the OnePlus is basically the best is with normal, like ultra-wide daylight shots. The sensor on the OnePlus 9 Pro is truly stellar, and the processing that goes into it is also doing an equally fantastic job here. Like, you can see the dynamic range, the colors, is spot on. The iPhone just looks a bit too desaturated for my liking. Like, those greens, parts of them, they don't even look green, so it doesn't look right to my eyes. The OnePlus, although a little bit on the vibrant side, it is definitely the better one here. But because we have a newer and higher quality sensor on the iPhone's ultra-wide, cropping in, we can see that the overall detail levels are very close. I do think there is a lot more sharpening going on, like you can see a lot more artifacting on the iPhone 13, but it's very close to the OnePlus. I could not say that for the iPhone 12 from last year, so it is definitely an upgrade, at least in daylight. At night, things are not quite similar, but we'll get to night shots later. For now, we have this backlit test, which is quite challenging to be entirely honest, but even then, the OnePlus is definitely doing a much better job in pulling out all of the details and the colors in the shadows. It's precisely why I like the OnePlus in this case so much more. And the iPhone, I think the worst part here is that it is looking a bit too desaturated. Like, I think it is pulling out the details, but it's not really giving us enough color in the shadows. Up next, for an ultra-wide shot in similar backlit conditions, and well, it's pretty much a same story as the one before. The iPhone, it's just not giving us enough saturation. I'm not sure why it's desaturating so much in this comparison, because I've done numerous other comparisons with numerous other flagships with the iPhone 13 Pro. You can check all of them out in the link in the description. It'll lead you to a playlist where we have all the videos. But I don't remember the iPhone desaturating this much. I think that's like enough reason for me to pick the OnePlus 9 Pro. Although I do want to point out that the OnePlus is a bit more vibrant than it actually was, but it's definitely closer to the realistic look. Now finally, I think this is one place where the iPhone is most definitely gonna pull ahead. It's with zoom. Now, to be honest, I never really thought I would actually say that for the iPhone 13 Pro, because nowadays most flagships tend to have really good and very versatile cameras with a lot of zoom range and all that, but the OnePlus is sort of like an exception in that regard, because right here, as you can see, when we zoom in, the amount of detail preservation on the iPhone is stellar, and it's a great sensor. The processing really takes advantage of it. On the OnePlus 9 Pro, however, the sensor is just not good enough. It's 8 megapixels and you can clearly see the loss in detail. Now, speaking of details, however, the OnePlus does kick back with the high resolution modes. So this is 48 megapixels on the OnePlus 9 Pro. Now the iPhone of course doesn't have anything as such, and I do want to once again point out that weird desaturation that we're getting on the iPhone. It just does not make sense to me. Like, you can look at the OnePlus 9 Pro and I guarantee that this is exactly how it looked to my eyes. Like, you can see that warmth from the sunlight, which is giving us that really rich brown color. That's exactly how it looked. But of course, cropping in, and there is also a huge difference in details here, for good reason. I mean, it's 4 times the resolution, and it's not obviously 4 times the detail that we can get on the OnePlus 9 Pro, because the iPhone, even with 12 megapixels, can produce really nice details, but comparatively, obviously the OnePlus is going to be better. I thought it was going to be quite a similar story for the ultra-wide shots here as well. So there's 50 megapixels on the OnePlus 9 Pro, and it's very high quality, no doubt about that. And I also do want to point out that I prefer the colors once again on the OnePlus 9 Pro. The iPhone is not doing a bad job in this case. Like compared to many of the other very desaturated shots we saw before, this is a much better shot here. But zooming in, well, this is quite interesting. I think there are two things that might be happening here. Either the iPhone is doing a ridiculously good job with bringing out the details, or the OnePlus is not doing a good enough job with the 50 megapixel sensor, because the only real difference is not actually in the details but rather in the presence of sharpening and processing artifacts and haloing on the iPhone 13 Pro. That's completely negated on the OnePlus 9 Pro thanks to a very high resolution sensor, but I'm really surprised that we don't get more detail on the OnePlus. I think it's just the case that the iPhone is really good at pulling details out, but that doesn't carry over to night mode once again. But that ultra-wide camera on the iPhone, it can produce probably some of the best macro photos that you can get, especially because it can get so very close. I mean, don't get me wrong, the OnePlus isn't doing a bad job. I mean, it is getting fairly close, but compared to the iPhone, that's almost nothing. And of course, the iPhone doesn't just stop there, because next up we have portraits, and this is a huge advantage on the iPhone 13 Pro. It's not just, the skin tones and the color processing and all that. I mean, that is present, but another major thing that helps out is that we get very good composition thanks to the 3x telephoto zoom on the iPhone. The OnePlus does have 3x zoom, but it doesn't use it in portraits. I'm not sure why, but that's just how it is. Here's a 1x shot on both, and for the most part both are very close, but there is more detail and overall better color accuracy on the iPhone 13 Pro. And using the respective zooms on both of these phones, the iPhone obviously has a telephoto lens, so there's no detail loss, but the OnePlus, it opts for a 2x crop. That's completely digital and you do lose out on a lot of details. Also, colors for the most part are actually better on the iPhone here, although it does look a little washed out. Next up for selfies, well, I'd say that here the OnePlus isn't doing a particularly bad job, but if I had to pick one, I'd go with the iPhone because, it's not trying to brighten my face up too much, and that just helps it maintain the contrast, while OnePlus, because it's trying to brighten me up, and it's just raising the overall black levels, and it looks a little washed out in my opinion. It is a difficult shot, of course, but even then the iPhone is definitely pulling ahead. Now this shot is kind of interesting, so yeah, both of them are kind of blowing out the highlights in the background. I had kind of expected either one to do a better job, but what's most interesting is that the iPhone 13 Pro is not nailing white balance. This is probably the first time that I've seen in this comparison where it's actually having issues with white balance. It was doing a really good job up until now actually. Although I do still prefer the skin tones on the iPhone 13 Pro. It's just a white balance that's kind of off, and you can clearly see it on my t-shirt. Now selfie portraits, well, for the most part it is better on the iPhone 13 Pro simply because of the colors. Like you get really fantastic edge detection, the background blur is very nice on both, but it's really that kind of desaturated look on the OnePlus 9 Pro that does not win any favors, from me at least. I much rather prefer the iPhone in this case. Now of course the iPhone can also do night mode portraits, which is honestly probably one of the best implementations in terms of quality that you can get. Like it comes out looking very nice and very crisp indeed. The OnePlus on the other hand, it actually couldn't take a portrait mode shot. We tried, trust me when I say, but the portrait mode, it just wasn't happening. Now selfie night mode, I'd say it's kind of interesting because the OnePlus doesn't really have that feature. It doesn't take a long exposure like the iPhone did in this case, but even then it's actually giving us similar levels of detail. The only real difference is in the colors, which is better on the iPhone, admittedly, and it is also nailing white balance here, while the OnePlus is trying a bit too hard to compensate for it. I mean, it was a dark situation, so that is kind of expected to happen when you don't have night mode on the front cameras, but even so, I'm kind of surprised that OnePlus was able to bring out so much detail. Now normal night modes, well, this is where it gets sort of interesting because the whole mojo about iPhone is that you point and you shoot. Everything else is done in camera and you don't even have to activate night mode because it happens automatically. My problem here is that it did not activate on the iPhone 13 Pro. I had to manually force it to activate, and at that point I'm not exactly pointing and shooting, now am I? it is actually easier to just switch to Nightscape on the OnePlus 9 Pro and take an image. On the iPhone, forcing night mode on is much more of a hassle, and I find myself doing that way more than anyone normally should. But speaking of night mode, I think in this case at least, the OnePlus is doing a much better job with colors. The iPhone is once again desaturating after a really nice break, I'd say. Ultra wide night mode, however, as I've been saying for pretty much the entire camera comparison, is not very good on the iPhone 13 Pro. Normal ultra wide shots were very nice, and the sensor upgrade in that regard is definitely visible, but man, night mode is just not gonna cut it. The OnePlus 9 Pro with a much larger sensor is definitely doing a much better job. Now you can see the leaves on the OnePlus 9 Pro. It's so much more detailed and there's so much less noise all around. At this shot here, I apologize for the framing being a little different, but the main reason I took it was to see if the iPhone would try and negate all of that warmth in the image, because there is a warm light shining on it, and I'm genuinely surprised that it didn't try to completely neutralize the image. I mean, that's essentially how it's been going for the previous camera comparisons. You can check them out from the link in the description. That's exactly how it's been. I'm kind of surprised that it did not do it. And here I was getting happy about it, but then I took a 3x zoom shot, and you cannot actually take 3x zoom shots with night mode on the OnePlus 9 Pro, so obviously it doesn't exactly stand a chance there. But you can see right here how the iPhone is completely negating all of that warmth that we saw in the previous image. It's the same subject, but it looks entirely different because it's neutralizing so damn hard that it just looks inaccurate. So here's another ultra wide shot, and well, this is actually darker than the previous one, so it showcases just how much better the OnePlus 9 Pro can be in these situations. Just zooming in even a little bit, you can see the differences. Whether it's the details in the reflection that is actually present on the OnePlus 9 Pro compared to nothing on the iPhone, or it's the noise and the oversharpening and artifacting. It's all better on the OnePlus, yeah. So if it is ultra wide shots in general that you want, I think overall the OnePlus is the one to go for. Now here's a final image with pretty dark shadows in the foreground and then some pretty damn bright highlights, as you can see in the background. Now for the most part, both are doing a stellar job here, I can tell you that much. Like, I expected either one of these phones to either completely screw it up or just produce a weird image, but they are actually doing a really good job. Although I do want to point out that the OnePlus 9 Pro is definitely producing more overall sharpness. You can see it in the brickwork on the floor or even the leaves far off in the distance. It's that there is just a little bit more sharpness and overall detail preservation. So yeah, in general, I think night mode is better on the OnePlus 9 Pro. I mean, it is very close, definitely, especially with the main cameras. You could easily go either way, but I think the ultra-wide camera and all that, it kind of just rounds the OnePlus 9 Pro's cameras to be better at night. But of course, we could quite easily say the same for the iPhone with portraits and human subjects in general, whether it's selfies, selfie portraits, normal portraits, whatever have you. You're gonna get much better results and much more accurate skin tones in particular with the iPhone 13 Pro. So it's an easy choice there. But I think we should also talk about how the OnePlus 9 Pro can improve with the next generation, because it's been quite a while since it came out, right? So essentially, what the OnePlus really needs is a really good zoom system next time around, because that's clearly where it's lacking by quite a bit. The fact that it's losing out to the iPhone, it's a very good indication there. And after that, we also need a good focus on human subjects. I think that's one of the biggest areas where improvements are needed for the OnePlus 9 Pro. And if OnePlus keeps continuing down this path of giving us natural colors and all that with the Hasselblad partnership, I think they're gonna get there real soon. I'm really excited about that prospect, if you ask me. So yeah, I'll be looking forward to the next OnePlus 10 Pro or whatever it is that comes out. So with that said, I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, do hit that like button, subscribe if you aren't already, and I will be seeing you guys later. Cheers.